How often have you felt restricted to spiritual practices that often seem outdated and of little relevance in today's world? Are you discouraged to express your own creative talents and develop spiritual practices that are uniquely you? The Liturgical Rebels podcast is for people like you who want to reimagine and reconstruct their faith and spiritual practices. It's for those who want to reshape belief and journey closer to God's wholeness with peace, justice, and flourishing, not just for themselves, but for the earth and all its inhabitants. Shane, it is so good to have you here on my podcast, The Liturgical Rebels.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to see your face and just to be able to chat to you about the many things that you are involved in. Tom and I have known you, I think, for about 25 years. And I remember way back when you and Tom used to do sessions together at CCDA conferences.
Yes.
And I remember you were quite a radical then with dreadlocks and homemade clothes. But it seems to me that you're even more of a radical now. So tell me a little bit about your journey.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Well, I have so many great memories staying in your home out there, seeing your little community and neighborhood and all those tag team workshops that we did. And yeah, it's just wonderful. Well, Christine, we celebrated 25 years of the Simple Way this year. So
Wow.
That's our little community we've been building on the north side of Philly. And I just love it. And I lived in the same block for all 25 years. I was walking somebody through the other day and I was like, I've lived in probably like 8 houses, but they're all on the same block because we kind of keep fixing up abandoned houses and passing them on. But yeah. And there's all kinds of stuff we're doing these days. I mean, Katie and I have been married for 13 years and just had a little baby. So we've got our little Elijah Allen. He's 3 months old and that's new, but we're absolutely loving it. And you know, our newest project that we've been working on lately is melting down the guns. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. But
yes.
Katie went to blacksmithing school. I don't know if you knew that, Christine.
I didn't know.
She's more of a legit blacksmith than I am. But we love doing that work together and planting our gardens just like you all, getting everything blooming for the spring and painting murals and helping kids with homework. I mean, all that's just sort of integrated into part of how we live around here. And so it's been a wonderful couple decades.
Well, it's amazing to me how many things you manage to be involved in. And I realize that part of that is because you live in community. So can you tell us a little bit about the community in Philadelphia there?
Yeah. And, you know, for folks that don't know, I mean, I never assume people know any of the history of our community these days, Christine, because half of the folks I meet weren't even born, you know, when we started our community. But I'm a Tennessee kid, so I grew up in the hills of East Tennessee and came up to Philadelphia to go to college. And I went to a wonderful university, Eastern University, which is about a half hour outside of the city of Philadelphia. And while I was doing my undergrad work there is when we had the kind of catalytic event that gave birth to our community. And that was a the courageous act of homeless families in Philadelphia, mostly moms and children, that had moved into an abandoned Catholic church building. And that
I remember that.
yeah,
Yes.
that was back in the 1900s. So yeah, it was 1995, and they began living there with about 100 people, mostly kids and families, and we got involved and started a sort of a student solidarity movement. But it was also really where our vision for community was born. We started reading about the early church in the book of Acts and how they shared everything in common, and this kind of radical ethic of love and nonviolence and economic sharing. No one was poor because they shared everything they had. I mean, that's the kind of beautiful stuff that inspired us. And we moved in shortly after that crisis of the kind of church takeover. And Katie and I got married in there in the old St. Edward's. It was still abandoned. The roof was leaking and everything. But we got married in there and have been building this community for ever since then. So that's sort of what we're up to and how things started. So when we got going, we kept hearing about all kinds of other wonderful renewals within the church, the Catholic worker movement, the different monastic orders, of course, like St. Francis and Clare of Assisi were part of this youth movement that was challenging the materialism and the violence of the holy wars around them, and rejected that version of Christianity for a better one. And so that's all kind of a part of our DNA. And so that's kind of what we've been up to.
Well, I think you're a wonderful inspiration to so many people, and particularly the way you work with people at the margins and so many different aspects of that, being an advocate for against gun violence, an advocate for people on death row, and now, of course, an advocate for stopping the war in Gaza as well and the genocide that's going on in that area. Tell me a little bit about where these concerns came from. This is not your average Christian these days, unfortunately. But where did your concerns for people at the margins start, and how did it develop?
The short answer to that is it really started with Jesus and with rereading the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the peacemakers. But the backdrop, I think, is important. As you know, Christine, growing up in Tennessee, I grew up with guns. I grew up hunting with my grandfather. My dad was in Vietnam, so I didn't really have a framework for kind of a theological framework for peace and nonviolence. I grew up with very comfortable with God and country and, war and worship and, all that. And, but when I was at Eastern, I started reading the words of Jesus, and I found myself at odds with a number of things that had come to distinguish and characterize evangelical Christianity in our country. And, have done a lot to try to unpack that. But, growing up, we would say that we were pro-life, but we had so narrowly defined that in terms of abortion that I think we would have been more accurate to say that we were pro-birth or we were anti-abortion rather than pro-life, because what you see is once a child is born, on a lot of other issues where lives are at stake or the flourishing of people is at stake, we've been an obstacle to that. On gun violence, Christians are the biggest gun-owning demographic in America. Christians own guns at a higher rate than the general population. So
it's horrifying.
Kind of blow your mind.
Yes.
Yeah. And on the death penalty, over 90% of executions happen in the Bible Belt. So wherever Christians are most concentrated is where the death penalty has survived. And those things are kind of haunting. And so that's why I've written a book on both of those. But in the newest
Which book is that?
I wrote a book on guns called Beating Guns. And I wrote a book on the death penalty called Executing Grace. But then the most recent book that I did, Rethinking Life, is really casting a bigger framework for connecting these issues, and also kind of identifying where did our vision for life begin to crack in history and even
Uh-huh.
currently. Like, how did abortion become the issue that eclipses all others? So those are the questions I kind of address in Rethinking Life. And of course, militarism is one of those, right? That as we look at military spending, this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. I think this is an issue that every Christian that claims to follow the Prince of Peace should care about. And Obama raised the military budget before him. And then Trump raised Obama's military budget. And now Biden has raised Trump's military budget to nearly $900 billion a year, which is just unfathomable amounts of money. So what's happening in Gaza is not just a political crisis, but I think it's also a deeply spiritual crisis when many Christians are twisting theology in order to try to justify that violence. And it absolutely breaks my heart.
Oh, mine too. Mine too. I think my wake up call came when I worked in the refugee camps on the Thai Cambodian border, and asking some of those same questions, and particularly asking that question, does God care? And if God cares, what is my responsibility? And that was my wake up call to realizing that God not only cared, but God cared about all life. And as you say, that consistent life ethic is so important. And of course, I grew up in a country that doesn't idolize guns to the same extent that America does. And so when I first came here, it just really, continues to puzzle me how so many Christians can be caught up in the gun culture like this. And it's one of the aspects of American culture I don't think I will ever understand. And I constantly get asked questions about that when I go overseas. It's like people are trying to fathom why are Americans in such a love relationship, or American Christians specifically in such a love relationship with guns. And it's very, very puzzling. I
It
think.
sure is, and I mean, I think that's a good thing to not be comfortable with. And when we call it a form of idolatry, we're not exaggerating or trying to use language loosely, but I think idols are things that we treat with sort of a reverence that should
Yes.
only be reserved for God. And idols make promises that they can't fulfill, that they will rid the world of evil, they'll protect us, they'll keep us safe, all that stuff. And we believe, like, scripture is so clear, like, some may trust in horses, some may trust in chariots, but we're to trust in God. So I know this is a podcast that most folks are not watching, but I have this with me because I was just at a school, Christine, but it's a Bible case that a pastor friend of mine gave me. And he said, this is the top selling Bible case in America. And I didn't think too much of it. It looks honestly like the Bible that I carried to high school when I was in Tennessee. And he said, open it up. And you open it up and it's a concealed carry. So, folks listening may not be able to see this, but it is one of the top selling Bible cases in America is actually not for a Bible at all, but it's designed to conceal and carry a gun. So that's why I think, like, this is not hyperbole to say that there's a form of idolatry to this.
That is so horrifying, Shane.
Yeah,
I had no idea. Yeah. Wow.
And it's very American, as you said. We have like 5% of the world's population in America, but we have almost half of the world's guns.
Yes.
So we've got more guns than people. We've got 5 times more gun dealers than McDonald's restaurants. So, and where there's more guns, there's more death. There's more suicides. There's more accidents. There's more homicides. And even the mass shootings that they rip our hearts out every time those happen. Like those are less than 1% of our overall gun deaths in
Yes.
America. And so you would think those people who are pro-life would be very concerned about this, because during COVID, um, gun violence became the number one cause of death of children and youth in
Yes.
America. So more than
Oh,
car accidents or cancer or anything else, guns are killing our kids.
it is. It's absolutely appalling. And you mentioned Katie becoming blacksmith or learning blacksmithing. And if I've got it right, one of the things you talk about is swords into plowshares or guns into plowshares. And I just love this. Tell us a bit about what you do in that regard.
Well, it has some old roots, right? So some folks that are familiar with scripture might recognize the image of beating swords into plows and spears into pruning hooks, and it's an image that is actually in both Micah and Isaiah in the biblical
Yes.
prophets, and it kind of gives this vision of a world where we transform the tools of death into tools of life, and that inspired us. It's
Oh,
been over 10 years
wonderful
ago.
imagery. Yeah,
Yeah, we
wonderful
started
imagery.
saying we don't have a lot of guns in America, or we don't have a lot of swords in America, but we have a whole lot of guns. And so we invited people to start safely surrendering guns. And now we've got a whole national network, and we call it Raw Tools, which
Yes.
comes from flipping the word war around. And in many ways, it's kind of a metaphor for what we do, trying to flip the metal and turn it into something else. And every time we do it, Christine, we're saying, all things can be made new. And what's
Amen.
true of metal as we recraft it is also true of human hearts, that even someone who's killed another person is more than the worst thing they've ever done. And God can transform human beings who have done horrific violence into a new creation. And God can transform our world, and we are to participate in that. So, sometimes when we talk about gun violence, people say, well, it's not a gun problem, it's a heart problem. And we say it can be both. And God heals hearts and people change laws. And I think we need both. No
Yes.
law can transform a racist or violent heart. But as Dr. Martin Luther King said, a law can't make you love me, but it can make it harder for you to kill me. And
Yeah.
that's what we should be in the business of doing, is making it harder for people to kill.
Amen. Amen. I just love some of the creative approaches that you have, not just in raw tools, but also in some of the out of the box initiatives that you've done around the liturgical calendar. And I can see behind you as we sit here, I can see your copy of Kelly Lattimore's icon, Christ Under the Rubble. Just absolutely profound for me during Advent. And it, I love this as an approach to Advent, not just leading up, same old kind of pussyfooting around the real issues, but taking something substantial like this and creating it as your focus for Advent. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how your advocacy for Gaza grew during this time? And I know that you raised money for Gaza and all of that.
Yeah, so some of this began, this like more recent campaign began, uh, of course, in the wake of the violence after October 7th, and the lives being lost in Gaza. And Reverend Isaac Munther over in Bethlehem, where the sweet Lord Jesus was born, was asked, "Where is God in the midst of this violence?" And Munther said, "God is underneath the rubble. Christ is in the rubble."
Mm,
And they set up a nativity scene, obviously in the iconic town of Bethlehem, with
yes.
the sort of traditional imagery of the native or the Holy Family in the nativity, and then it was underneath, buried in the bricks and the mortar of the bombs, and that's what kind of inspired a whole campaign that we did around Advent with Munther, called Christ in the Rubble, and he gave a sermon. Um, right before Christmas. That was I hear it's now listened to by over 10 million people, Christine. So
It was
folks around the
inspiring.
world have heard that. We helped broadcast it with other groups,
It
and then
was very inspiring. Yes, I listened to it. It was very inspiring.
yeah, it's powerful. And folks can find the transcript or watch the video at redletterchristians.org. We've got it all up there. But we also, it inspired this newer kind of icon that's also called Christ in the Rubble from Kelly Lattimore. And Kelly and I started talking, and we've done other collaborations and really like each other. And we were talking about what we could do and brainstorm this idea. And he painted this beautiful one, which we actually have the original of. And so there's lots of prints that have come out, and we're going to be sharing it. I mean, the whole point's to get the word out there. But we gave prints away to folks that donated $100 or more. And, originally, Christine, I was thinking, like, if we could raise $10,000, it'd be awesome for Gaza. And then over 1,200 signed prints, bless his heart, from Kelly. We raised over $130,000, probably closer to $150,000 now.
That's
and we've
wonderful.
been very transparent about who we're giving it to, because we want people, even if they don't get the icon, to support, to pray for, to donate to these groups. And many of them are led by Palestinian Christians, folks with feet on the ground in Gaza. So there's about a dozen different groups that we're supporting, and some of their buildings have been bombed and their people have been killed. And that's what we've been up to. And then we think we're going to talk about that, but we also then led into a whole Advent season where we did a holy walk, a Holy Week peace walk, and everything.
And Easter. Yeah. We will talk about that in the moment. But I think we were some of the ones that entered into that, at Advent, and I just downloaded and printed out my copy. I didn't need it to be signed. I realized he was probably overwhelmed by that. And it became my focus for the season of Advent. And it profoundly changed my way of thinking about Advent and thinking about the world into which Jesus was born. That this, in many ways, was much more of an appropriate image for the world into which Jesus was born, where there was that incredible conflict with empire. And, I'm sure that the people that Jesus lived with weren't being well treated all the time either. And so it was a very powerful and it seemed to me appropriate image for the time. But then you did do, again, for the season of, for Holy Week, coming up to Easter this year, you did another focus on Gaza, really in two parts. You did it with the pilgrimage walk, and then, of course, that pilgrimage walk ended on Good Friday at the headquarters of Lockheed Martin, the world's largest weapons contractor. So tell us firstly about the walk, and then we'll move on to talking about that protest outside Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, and so obviously, as we revolve around the liturgical year as liturgical rebels, as you say, we kind of move from the season of Advent to this season of Lent and Easter, and we began to see, over and over every day, news of the devastating violence in Gaza. And I don't know anyone that has tried to defend Hamas. In fact, we, without hesitation, denounced the violence of October 7th and grieved the, over 1,200 lives that were lost and the hostages taken. From the very beginning, have been asking that all the hostages be released. And that humanitarian be led into Gaza. And then as the bombing began to, really, really escalate, we saw the cost of this, right? The violence since October 7th. And interestingly enough, Christine, not everyone will know, but I was in Iraq during the bombing of Baghdad in 2003. And so a lot of this for me was also hauntingly kind of going back to September 11th. In fact, people have even
Yes.
compared this to September 11th. And you go, what we did after September 11th was just begin to absolutely destroy the country of Iraq and Afghanistan and kill tens of thousands of lives in revenge of September 11th. And we began to see that, and you start to go, how many children have to die in Gaza to atone for the sins of Hamas?
Yes.
Collective punishment is evil. And there's things that we're seeing that, are just indefensible for any Christian, especially, but really for any person of conscience. And
Yes.
so, how do we put feet on our frustration and prayers? And so we heard about a pilgrimage in New Zealand. Our friend Jared McKenna had talked about this person that had walked the length of Gaza roughly as a prayerful pilgrimage. And that vision began to, I would say the Spirit, the Holy Spirit really did something, and folks everywhere began to really resonate with that. And there's these solidarity walks, the Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages that began to happen all over the world. And they didn't just happen, they were organized, but it was a spirit too. And, first it was like 20 and then 50 and then 100. And then it was ended up being, we even lost count over, nearly 200 peace pilgrimages, Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages, and on every continent. And there was even a great story in Antarctica, because we used to say every continent except Antarctica. And someone in the continent of Antarctica said, we're going to do one here.
Oh, I love it.
It's like, 50 below zero. So we're going to do they walked on a treadmill, 25 miles or something, in solidarity. So we did that in Philly. We, my friend Lisa Sharon Harper and I began to pray and to talk together. And she's in South Philly, I'm in North Philly. So we started thinking, what's a route that we could do the length of Gaza? And felt very compelled to go from the Liberty Bell, our sort of iconic bell here in Philly, to as we looked at the radius of 20 miles, Lockheed Martin fell right in that length. And for many, many years, there have been Good Friday vigils at Lockheed Martin, connecting the suffering and solidarity and violence inflicted on Jesus and looking at the violence in our world. So we've actually had a number of vigils there, and we're building on that rich, tradition of activism there. And that's what we did. So we walked Philadelphia from the Liberty Bell to Lockheed Martin, and we did a few miles a day. And it was amazing. Kids, families, folks. We walked through different neighborhoods, and we did a liturgy that was compiled and curated by Palestinian Christians, friends of ours. So we kind of remembered what's traditionally like the Stations of the Cross, or even, the days of Holy Week that we went there. And then, of course, culminating on Good Friday at Lockheed Martin. So I can talk a little bit more about that if you want, because we created really a prayerful liturgy that was a part of our action there.
Is that liturgy available somewhere?
Yeah, I've written some of it up. Actually, the liturgy that we use for Holy Week is on the Gaza Ceasefire Pilgrimages website. There's a whole toolkit for organizing, and we have every intention to continue to organize around it.
We will make sure that information is in the show notes for this, so that people can find that as well. That would be very interesting, I think. So tell us a little more about what happened at, at Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, and again, Lockheed Martin is the right place to be, because not only was it in our region, but it is also one of the biggest profiteers of war in the world. This is a company that's made a business off of war, So there's an old saying, if you want to end violence, figure out who's making a profit off of it. And Lockheed Martin makes the planes that are dropping the bombs in Gaza. So we went there in the Hellfire missile systems. Like so much of the machinery of death is manufactured at Lockheed Martin. So Christine, we were really inspired by the part of the story of Jesus's death is Pontius Pilate washing the blood off of his hands, like washing his hands, trying to be clean of the violence. And so that metaphor kind of was really brought to our hearts, and we made a banner that said, Lockheed Martin, there's blood on your hands. And we also had red paint that we had tons of kids and families that showed up. And so people put their handprints. My little baby, my 3-month-old baby, put his little handprint on the sign. And there's handprints that had the numbers, right? That over 13,000 children that have been killed. And we carried their names. We don't know all of their names. In fact, some of them are still missing, right? But the names that we know of the children killed in Gaza, we printed on posters, and we carried those onto the base of Lockheed Martin. So we had a powerful, prayerful liturgy with singing from Common Hymnal, one of our wonderful, musical friends. And they sang together. We prayed together. We had Jewish folks, Muslim folks, Christians that were sharing their heart on Good Friday. But there was a particular Christian orientation, as we remember Jesus's death, and the way that he put violence on display in order to subvert it with love and forgiveness and an empty tomb. And so on Good Friday, we kind of remembered the suffering, and we held images of the bombing and the devastation in Gaza that each of them on it, Christine, it said, made in the USA. Because we're remembering that, both the funds and the weapons being used in Gaza are coming from the United States. So it's not Israel's war or genocide. It's the U.S. and Israel's. And we are very, very disappointed. That's not even a hard enough word. Devastated by Biden's support of this. And so that was part of what we're carrying with us. So it was a powerful procession that we did. And listen to this, Christine. When we got to Lockheed Martin, they had covered their corporate signs. Literally, they took tarps and they duct taped the tarps over their signs. So, they made the point for us, right? And you cannot hide. You cannot pretend. You cannot wash the blood off of your hands. And so there's a point where we're allowed to be on public property, and a part where it crosses over to the Lockheed Martin's property. And there was a group of us that was prepared and centered, and also we had done a number of trainings to prepare to go onto the property. So we crossed over that line, those of us that were doing the direct action. But then what was amazing was we had roses that the young people and adults could come and put on the names of the children that had died. Several folks that carried the signs of the names laid down on the ground in the great tradition of die-ins at these protests. And so it really was a liturgical protest. It was kind of taking worship and activism into the streets and putting them together, very much grounded as Christians in our faith. We said the Lord's Prayer as the police came, and they did detain us. So the part of the Lord's Prayer where we say, forgive us our trespasses, had a new ring to it as we were arrested for trespassing. But we were detained, and we were 25 of us were handcuffed and taken to jail.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's also like why when John Lewis says we can smile in our mugshots because we know that we're on the right side of history. So, in a few weeks, I will defend why I did what I was doing in court, and we'll continue to organize. And we've got a lot of work to do. But I'm convinced that there was a crime committed, and we actually put crime scene tape up around Lockheed Martin. But the crime was not prayerfully kneeling on our knees and saying the names of the children killed in Gaza. The crime that was committed is the designing and the marketing and selling of weapons that destroy tens of thousands of lives. And so that's what we really wanted to name.
Amen. I agree with you wholeheartedly. We're almost at the end here, but before we finish, I want to end up on a nice note, I suppose. Tell us a little about, you now have a baby boy, as you've already mentioned, 3 months old. And what impact has becoming a father had on you in terms of the work that you do? Obviously, Eli is kind of already being taught to be a radical and to be a liturgical rebel. And I love that. But what impact has this had on your life?
Well, I guess it was his first protest, at 3 months old. We've gone to a few of them, but this was certainly one of his first. And every time I hold him, Christine, and I'm, sometimes 3 a.m, and I think of those kids in Gaza, and that their life is just as precious as this little baby that I'm holding. And obviously, like, we're all partial to think our kids are the cutest kids in the world, but I think that the radical love of Jesus and even the message of the gospel, the idea of being born again, which I think became a little cliche for me growing up, but I've come to really embrace that and say to be born again means that these little children in Gaza are just as precious as my little baby Eli, and the grandmothers that are being, displaced and devastated. That's just as tragic as if it were my own mom or grandmom. As that passage in Corinthians says, that when one part of our body suffers, we all suffer. And so I think right now, like, it reframes so much of that, having a little baby in my arms. I mean, we were obviously having our baby right at the time of Christmas, so there's all kinds of layers of liturgical depth, to being pregnant with Mary through, Advent as she's giving birth to Jesus, and thinking of not just all that we have to be thankful for, though that's very true, but also thinking, what does love require of us right now to love our neighbor as ourselves? What does it mean to believe that every Palestinian life is just as precious as every Israeli life? And so that's it. And I also think of the world I want to leave to Eli, right? To my baby. There is no doubt in my mind that a generation from now, 40 years, 20, 30 years from now, like, our kids and grandkids are going to ask us, what did you do? Like, what were you doing when Gaza was being destroyed? And we look at these moments in history, and sometimes you think that these things just happen, but they don't just happen. We make history together, and we are alive to do something. So I want to be able to tell Eli, we did everything we knew to do to stay faithful and to stop the violence in Gaza. And here's a picture of you putting your little handprint on the banner. You were there too. So we, standing in solidarity with all the 3-month-old babies born in Gaza. And, and we had a lot of complications when we were giving birth, Christine. And as a doctor, you can appreciate that. I won't go into the details, but, we were in intensive care, and both Katie and Eli had some complications. And I just thought to myself, like, if this had happened in Gaza, I could have lost both my wife and my baby.
Yeah.
And that's happening to many folks. And so I think there's a new sensitivity that we should have in our hearts to say, man, forcing doctors to do surgeries by the light of a phone without anesthesia, these things are horrific and indefensible.
They really are. They really are.
Yeah.
I think of, as you're talking, what I think of is Jesus saying, don't stop the children from coming to me. And I think that war and this kind of horrific genocide is stopping the children in many ways from coming to Jesus, of being able to live in the presence of Jesus, to live in the presence of Jesus. And I think my impression is that Jesus loved kids. Jesus, I think, was often surrounded by children, which got the disciples exasperated. But I think that children are very, very important to Jesus. And not just in the birth of one like Eli, but those children in Gaza, so important to Jesus, I think. And it's good to remember that.
It's so important to remember that. And it is a hopeful thing. I mean, I think of the defiant hope of the kids in Gaza. I just saw a video of some of them breakdancing, and you may have seen like the image of some of them like riding down like on a tray down into one of the places where a bomb fell. And there's this kind of innocence in the middle of the horrific evil of empire that should inspire all of us, and that vision of beating swords into plows also says, that the prophetic vision is a child will lead them, right? The children will be able to play again and, live without fear. Old and young together will dream dreams. And so all of that's there, and at our rally, as we went into Lockheed Martin, I had a recording. I might be able to give it to you if you wanted to put it on the end of the show here, but it's when we were in Iraq. My friends heard these children singing in the middle of the sanctions and the war, and they were singing "We Shall Overcome" in Arabic. And so that I've come to think, we shall overcome. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. It's a beautiful, courageous, prophetic song, maybe kind of the anthem of our human family right now in all parts of the world. So
I love that. If you are able to send it to me, I'd love that. So, well, it has come to an end. I think, Shane, we could talk forever. There's so many other questions I'd like to ask you, but this is about as much time as we got. One more question. What is the best way for people to contact you?
Folks can find my website. There's a lot of great folks at Red Letter Christians, and you can find my contact there. But I also have a website. It's just my name, ShaneClaiborne.com. And so a lot of the things I've talked about, or how to get books, or, follow me on Threads and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I try to stay as up to date on all that stuff as I can. So, and I travel quite a bit. So my schedule's up on my website, and I'd love to see y'all on the road as I'm traveling around.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Shane. This has been an inspirational time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bless you. Bless you and Tom.
Bless you too.
See you soon, I hope.
Today, I was in conversation with Shane Claiborne, a Christian activist and author, about his journey and his work in advocating for social justice. We discussed community living at the simple way, gun violence and turning guns into garden implements, the death penalty, and the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Shane shares his experiences and insights, highlighting the importance of love, nonviolence, and solidarity with marginalized communities. We ended the conversation with talk about his new role as a father and its impact on his advocacy. In the next episode of The Liturgical Rebels, I will interview Tony Jones, the author of The God of Wild Places, Rediscovering the Divine in the Untamed Outdoors. His many books include The Sacred Way, Spiritual Practices for Everyday Life. Tony also hosts the Reverend Hunter podcast and teaches at Fuller Theological Seminary. He has many interests and owns an event planning company, Crucible Creative, as well as guiding canoe trips in the BWCA and writing retreats in Italy. I am Christine Sine, author of The Gift of Wonder and facilitator of the God Space Light website. You can connect to me on Instagram, Facebook, and my new Substack page, Walking in Wonder with Christine Sine.